From the UBS Broadcast Center at Union University, this is Jackson 24/7.
Hello, I'm Thomas Gray.
I'm Emily Littleton.
I'm Teri Jelks.
More than 60 years ago, the first vestiges of the civil rights movement began in America. In Jackson, the push for equality started with a culture-changing act downtown.
In this special edition of Jackson 24/7, we explore the issues of racial division and what the challenges are for true reconciliation in the present day.
When you look back to the middle of the 20th century, you discover our racial divide and its roots in the economy and education. Today, political and cultural leaders say the same thing is true. For the next half hour, Jackson 24/7 explores the racial divide and the road to reconciliation.
On October 27, 1960, African-American students from Lane College walked into the Woolworth's lunch counter in downtown Jackson, a place designated whites only. Over the following weeks of protests, 4 freshmen emerged as leaders of the civil rights movement in Jackson. Kimmy Davis, Ernest Brooks, Wesley McClure, and Shirlene Mercer helped dissolve public segregation in Madison County.
The movement throughout the South of integration of lunch counters and other public facilities was taking place. And when we went to Lane, we decided to participate in the movement.
As you know, we had the separate water fountains. We had the separate restrooms in Jackson.
What were we thinking about? To deny a whole group of people the right to sit at a lunch counter and eat a hamburger. We can't forget our history.
60 years ago, Jackson was roughly 40% African American, most of whom worked for the rail yard, at Lane College, or in other businesses around town. Lane became a rallying point for the civil rights movement, along with African American churches.
Lane College was very prominent and supported the civil rights movement, but the black churches and the black ministers at that time took a leading role in the civil rights movement.
The bus line integrated quickly. Department stores were slower to follow suit, but eventually they either desegregated or closed their lunch counters. In 1962, civil rights activists turned their eyes to the segregated public schools. A 15-year-old named Brenda Monroe Moses became the plaintiff in a class action lawsuit to force Jackson High School to integrate African American students. The suit worked, and she became the first black graduate of the school. Jackson High and Mary High School merged to form Jackson Central Mary, which was an exemplary success among integrated schools.
JCM was a school that was revered all across the state.
These teachers and the students were simply wonderful. I spent 19 years at that school before I left, and I was very proud of the way that the integration of our school went.
The integration of schools in Jackson was largely peaceful and successful, but the building of private schools became one of the first signs of trouble for education in Jackson.
During the time that we integrated, the private schools started, and later on in the years that the enrollment was affected.
Like in many cities across America, people began to move away from traditional neighborhoods and into suburbs in North and West Jackson. They formed private schools for their new communities. The net effect was that, once again, white and black began to be separated by education.
To me, there is some neglection of certain areas of our city, and this should not be done.
As the wealth began to move north, racial separation became evident in Jackson's economics as well. Businesses that formerly invested in the well-educated town moved away as the schools began to fail.
When a company looks at an area to relocate, it looks at education as one of the top things coming in there, because they've got to have a workforce that they can use.
With poverty rising and education declining in the communities left behind, crime began to creep more into Jackson.
I once was a police officer for a number of years in Metro Narcotics, and I can tell you that oftentimes the people that we're locking up are the same ones that did not get the opportunity growing up to be in a good environment, a nurturing environment, did not get a good education.
In the past 60 years, Jackson has made much progress working through racial divides, but there are still many issues left that confront us along racial and socioeconomic lines.
There is a messy truth about it.
I think there has been a lot of progress made, but I also think that there's a lot of progress that needs to be made.
I think over the last 30, 40 years, we have made a lot of progress in terms of living together, but there's still a lot that needs to be done.
Join us as Jackson 24/7 continues to explore the messy truth behind race relations in Jackson.
Those are the roots of courageous acts that began a march for equality that still continues today.
Economic equality remains a challenge in Jackson and many cities around the nation.
When we return, we'll examine why the problem remains and some possible answers. Stay with us as we explore more about the racial divide and the road to reconciliation.
Steve Beverly's TV classics can cure what ails you.
I watched and it got rid of my hemorrhoids.
Staying awake at night? Just watch TV classics.
My daughter watched and she went right to sleep.
Do not watch Steve Beverly's TV classics if bites upset your stomach. Do not watch if high drama leads to emotional distress. And do not turn on TV6 Saturday or Sunday at 7 if hillbillies give you a gallbladder attack.
Ask your doctor if Steve Beverly's classics is right for you.
Last year, the city moved forward with a new retail development and housing expansion in East Jackson. That's a step, but community leaders say we have to do more.
A local college professor has examined the numbers. She says the lack of economic equality is because we don't work together and tap into our common brain power.
Solutions cannot happen if we aren't honest about the problem.
In part 2 of our series, Racial Divide, The Road to Reconciliation, we look at issues of economic inequality in the hub city.
In the mid-20th century, outrage over integration led to what was called white flight. As cities became more racially diverse, many whites moved from the inner cities to suburbs to form their own communities with their own businesses and their own schools.
And often the excuse was, we're moving here where we can develop safe neighborhoods and we can develop schools that will educate our children. And they basically would say that as if it had nothing to do with race whatsoever. But of course it did have everything to do with race. Race trumps everything else when it comes to issues like this. And so white flight in Jackson really in many ways feels the same as it does in cities like Memphis or Atlanta, even if it's a little bit of a different structure there. The whole point is ultimately it's segregation, even if segregation is no longer legal.
The white flight severely impacted the economy in many ways that still affect us today. It contributed to a large economic division between North and South Jackson. When Sherry Sides, an economics professor at Lane College, first moved to Jackson 4 years ago, she conducted an economic study that showed people living south of I-40 had an average income of $32,000 to $38,000. People living north of I-40 had an average income of $70,000 to $75,000. Harold Carter, president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Jackson-Madison County, said that 30 to 35% of the African American population in Jackson lives at a level below the poverty line, and many more work for minimum wage. Sides said that many of the jobs held by African Americans are seasonal or inconsistent, such as hair care or landscaping, which also cost the government in terms of tax revenue. She said that another problem is that people tend to hire what looks like them, meaning people who have the same experiences and views. Because of this, people approach problems the same way.
If we don't expand, then we have the opportunity cost of missing out on potential income.
Jackson has a higher unemployment rate than the state average, while Tennessee has a higher unemployment rate than the national average. However, Sides said that racial reconciliation can exponentially improve the economy.
We see it at a macro level with multinational enterprises, with multinational companies. When a company stays just in the U.S., yeah, they grow. But then when they expand into other countries, they grow exponentially. And likewise, if Jackson came together we're growing. Jackson is growing. I've been here 4 years, and I've seen significant growth. But we can do so much exponentially if we just came together and said, okay, we're going to do this so that everybody benefits. We're better united than we are divided. And actually, division is not at the heart of the aspirational United States. Jackson is a good proving ground and testing ground.
Bates and Carter agree that creating solutions start with public awareness of the issue.
It's very easy for people to unintentionally sometimes turn a blind eye to these things, as if they don't even exist. In order to overcome these blind spots, for some people, it's just a matter of knowledge, being aware.
The economic conditions in Jackson, Madison County, as far as people of color, is a very challenging one, and something that needs to be looked at from not only a diverse standpoint of view, but I think from just knowing.
For Jackson 24/7, I'm Allie Renckens.
The challenge of achieving economic equality is tied to education. Some community leaders are content with where we are in public education.
But others say we cannot keep tap dancing around what they see as the unfortunate truth with our schools.
Our community has spent years with concerns about where we educate our children. The question many see as more important is how we are educating them.
In part 3 of Racial Divide, The Road to Reconciliation, we examine all of these questions. Stay with us as our special edition of Jackson 24/7 continues.
Gig, 1,000 megabit speed, now available to any E+ broadband internet customer. This gig-enhanced infrastructure has the capacity to increase speeds in the future. E+ broadband, what many interpreted as JA's entrance into cable television, was actually the foundation of an unparalleled communications infrastructure. Looking out for Jackson's economic and lifestyle future is all a part of JEA today.
John Worthing is a principal who spent years in the Jackson-Madison County school system. He would tell you that during his years of retirement, some things haven't changed.
Dave Bratcher is a current member of the Jackson-Madison County School Board. His father was a former principal of Jackson Central Mary High School.
Those are just two voices who represent perspectives on public education in our community. In any city, schools are at the heart of opportunities for a city's workforce and the future of its graduates.
In part 3 of Racial Divide, The Road to Reconciliation, we look at some honest appraisals of our community's history with public education.
Racial tension has been a plague to the American education system since before the legal separation of blacks and whites in the late 1800s. This tension between races was amplified in 1954 when the Brown versus Board of Education ruling outlawed segregated public education facilities. Jackson, Tennessee was one of the countless cities that had to overcome racial differences in order to provide a quality education for all American citizens.
So Jackson High was the white high school in the city, and Mary High was the black high school in the city. And so I think what the union of those two schools said was that together we don't have two separate aspirations any longer. We have a common aspiration, and that we are stronger as one versus stronger as two.
The merging of these two high schools had a positive impact for the city of Jackson, considering the racial tension that surrounded the time period.
I was teaching at Mary High School, and we had students. Some of the students I taught that participated in the civil rights movement. Along that came with the integration of our schools, which went very orderly and very peacefully at that particular time.
Due to the guidance of positive role models, the integration of schools in Madison County had a smooth transition.
Somehow, through the help of teachers and parents, we were able to gel that school. The students got along well together. I was very proud of the way that the integration of our school went.
In the early 2000s, Jackson-Madison County created 2 new high schools that greatly affected the racial diversity of Jackson Central Mary.
So one of the dirty little secrets that nobody wants to really talk about is the same year that Madison opened, Liberty Technology opened. And the best and brightest teachers at JCM put in for a transfer to Madison. And the ones that didn't get into Madison put in a transfer to Liberty. So did it affect the product? 110%.
The growing popularity of private schools greatly impacted the diversity and academic performance of the school system.
African Americans are reading at a lower rate than whites. Well, that's true, but there are more African Americans in the school system than there are whites.
But you have top students in the public education that can compete with any private school education. The issue with public education that you're mandated to educate all of the children, not just the one that you can select.
It all comes down to, do you have the ability to pay for another option? We need to align our resources not based on race, but based on need to those schools and to those pockets. Because if I have cancer of my ear, I don't need to do radiation on my foot, because that's not where the cancer is.
There has been criticism against the school system's lack of action when it comes to providing resources for those schools in need.
Even people in academia says less about our public school system, which I think they ought to be just hitting the roof. You know, they should. But we live in a culture that suppresses real debate and real issues because it's not the norm. It's something that we feel uncomfortable with. And that's the lack of courage.
Clearly, I look different than someone who's African American. We can't erase that. We can't wish that it weren't true. It's just a fact. So that's number one. If we've got a school that needs additional resources, we need to flood that school with those resources, whether it's the best and brightest teachers, whether it's the best technology, whatever it is, regardless of race. Because at the end of the day, we are developing the leaders in our community of tomorrow. And how we do today is going to affect what we live in tomorrow.
Reporting for Jackson 24/7, I'm Teri Jelks.
Our city and county consolidated school districts in 1990. The idea was that one unified district would make us stronger and improve educational opportunities. And yet, political and personal agendas have frequently interfered. At the moment, our school board is in a search for its 10th superintendent in 27 years. A big question is whether the next leader will have a big picture approach or will be content to maintain what we have now. The racial divide has also led to an increase in crime in many cities across the nation. We'll see how that's affected Jackson in part 4 of our series, right after these messages.
In looking at economic and educational inequality, you don't have to go far to fill in a blank. Those on the lower end of both of those categories are vulnerable to crime. A significant majority of those in our jails are African Americans, and they are repeat offenders. Jackson 24/7 reporter Caleb Lay looks at where the issue of crime falls in our racial divide.
Like in many communities, preventing and mitigating crime presents a constant challenge to Jackson's government officials and law enforcement officers. Navigating this challenge is not clear-cut. It means dealing with complex issues of race and socioeconomic status that confront our city.
A lot of people call the police department for a lot of stuff that's not even police related. But the police department are the most, basic manifestation of government because they enforce the law. Something happens, the police show up. You have a wreck, the police show up. Someone breaks in your house, the police show up. And so sometimes it puts police officers in no-win situations.
Harold Carter, president of Jackson's NAACP, says that the police are often overburdened in their efforts to reduce crime. and that communities need to take responsibility as well.
You're requiring law enforcement to do the things that the community is not doing, because they pick up all the refuge and stuff that's in the community that they say is not good enough for society. We have to do something with them. We got to pick them up. We got to take them to court, and we got to incarcerate them.
Carter says race can affect the way sentencing and incarceration works. Sometimes race relations are ignored and overlooked in the process, but this is harmful to minority communities. 64% of currently incarcerated inmates in Jackson are African American. African Americans make up 37% of the population in Madison County.
The judge can give you more time for crack than he would for regular cocaine. More whites use the regular powder cocaine, and more people of color, those with lesser monies, can afford to crack, because crack is cheaply made, but it's the same substance.
Many people are in jail when they need treatment for mental health issues or simply because they are poor and can't afford their fines. Carter argues these people should be helped and not punished.
A lot of people are locked up simply for either have substance abuse issues, mental issues, or just poverty. They can't pay a fine. And once you get into the system, you know, it's a revolving door.
This debate came to a head over the summer when the city announced plans to build a new jail after the state mandated something be done to alleviate overcrowding. Jackson's NAACP denounced these plans and argued that a new jail amounted to investing in crime.
We can get tough on crime, but it'd be better to get smart on crime. Smart meaning that you have to put that $60 or $70 million into the education system and to educate those children.
Issues of race are inextricably linked to issues of crime, and there are no easy or simple solutions. As the police department sorts through how to respond to the needs in our city fairly, communities need to cooperate and support them as well.
There's been an ongoing effort to do community policing, which essentially really is focused on getting community and police together to solve problems together, to communicate together. A police department is only as strong as the community that it serves.
Crime is only one aspect that affects Jackson's race relations. Join Jackson 24/7 as we continue to explore this issue.
A footnote to this story, we're in the process of building a new jail for Madison County. Our current rate of repeat offenders is 85%. Sheriff John Mayer and other county leaders say we can't just build a jail. We have to offer programs and opportunities for a better life to keep inmates from returning. Education, economy, and crime. Those are the three huge issues affecting our community. But what about solutions? That's what we'll explore in our final part of Racial Divide, the road to reconciliation, as Jackson 24/7 continues.
Every child follows a path in life. For many, that path will lead them to a door that gives them a place to grow, to learn, to belong, a place to forge their future. Because while many doors open, these doors transform. They did for us. Support your local Boys and Girls Clubs. Great futures start here.
We've been on a journey of more than 60 years since the rise of the civil rights movement in America, including the efforts in Jackson. Two of our local universities have been holding open dialogues on how we can do more to achieve racial reconciliation.
To reach that point, leaders of that effort say we have to do more than talk about what divides us in order to reach solutions that can unite us. That's what we explore in our final part of Racial Divide, the road to reconciliation.
What's the solution to racial divide? Aaron Crocker, a college student in Jackson, is passionate about helping others to be aware of racial problems and how to solve them.
Our world is going to become more and more diverse, it's going to become more mixed, and there's a generation that's not ready for that.
The economic, historical, criminal, and educational issues are clear, but there's also hope of reconciliation and healing.
One of the things I think we need to work toward and we need to talk about is the flourishing of all people in our community.
While there is tension, there's also a desire for unity.
We've been blessed in Jackson not to have some of the tensions around policing and some of the tensions related to even sort of governmental entities. And I think we should all be grateful in Jackson that we indeed do have such strong relationships among the people of Jackson.
Both Lane College and Union University have made efforts to serve as examples of what racial reconciliation can look like, and especially how important communication and building relationships can be.
Well, I think, one of the things that I think is really important is that we engage in relationships, and that those be as organic, as natural as possible.
Last year, Lane and Union held a panel discussion on racial reconciliation. While this is important, Jackson-Madison County NAACP President Harold Carter says that it's important not only to have these conversations, but to have them intentionally and with the right people.
I think the open discussion that you should be having is with different people like myself and organizations in the city that has lived through that period, understand that period, both black and white.
How do we get past these conversations? Lane President Dr. Logan Hampton says that the next step is building relationships.
I don't think we truly improve our communities unless those relationships. We don't ever get past this conversation about race until we build a relationship.
Dr. Hampton and Dr. Oliver both agree that the goal of racial reconciliation is to take a step further.
Anybody who has a commitment to this is, the way I said, is just get up and walk across the room. Just get up and meet someone new and engage with them.
There are groups in the community that are working together to bring unity.
There are so many kind things that happen in Jackson, Madison County that really, when we look at what happens with ARM, as churches, diverse churches coming together, building a ministry for the least of these, RIFA, the people of Jackson, Madison County coming together for the least of these. What happens in the United Way, led by Scott Conger? This is the community rallying around an organization for the least of these. Those are the kinds of things that don't really get as much attention as they ought to.
According to Aaron, reconciliation requires taking time to listen and be patient.
When you come into contact with someone who's different than you, then you need to listen to them. Racial reconciliation is a really long process, and there's not like one solution to it.
It's not something that will happen overnight, but people like Harold Carter, Dr. Oliver, and Dr. Hampton give us examples of how, with time and effort, broken relationships between races can be mended. Reporting for Jackson 24/7, I'm Hayley Lievers.
Want to make your life a little easier? Now you can manage your Jackson Energy Authority account online. View statements, pay your bill, set up reminders, or recurring payments. Spend more time with your family, not your bills. It's easy. Just visit www.jaxenergy.com anytime and sign up. Make your life a little easier with online bill pay from Jackson Energy Authority.
For the past half hour, we have explored how our racial divide began a long journey to equality with the dramatic act of African Americans having the courage to sit down and eat at a lunch counter at F.W. Woolworth downtown.
We've seen the struggles and the continued roadblocks to economic and education equality in the Hub City.
And we've examined possible solutions to bring us to true reconciliation as people.
We wind up this special edition with quotes from 3 national Christian leaders on the goals of racial reconciliation. Dr. Tony Evans says, God is not asking blacks to be white or whites to be black, but for both to be biblical.
Pastor Tripp Lee says, our goal is not just to get black people and white people in the same room. Jay-Z can do that. We want blacks and whites in the same family.
Finally, the first African-American president of the Southern Baptist Convention, Dr. Fred Luter, says, once you have been reconciled to God, you have no problem with being reconciled with others. The road to racial reconciliation continues. Thank you for watching.